So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to spend some time this morning looking at the accounts receivable module inside of our writer. Before we actually get into AR, we're going to look at it from two different perspectives. First off is actually using the accounts receivable module, and we'll get there eventually after we actually figure out, well, how do we actually get something into accounts receivable? So we're going to start out with talking about accounts receivable at the actual point of sale. And then after we're done with that, we'll go and we'll look at, well, then what do we do afterwards? Meaning once we've got a transaction or we've got an outstanding balance in accounts receivable, how do we manage that? What do we do with it from there as we go along? So as we start out, I'm just looking at my main RO Writer window. And if I was to look at my customer here, Pat Clark, she's got her 2002 Ford Mustang, and we've done some AC work for Pat over the course of the last couple of days or so. We want to send her on her way. However, we are going to finalize this transaction to AR. So in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to go ahead and click on Finalize. I'll verify my mileage, and then once we get into my payments window, over here on the right-hand side, I have two different options. I have charge to a third party, and I have a one-time charge. Now, before we actually get into utilizing either one of these are actually configurable options, meaning whether or not those buttons exist and whether or not there is a security level associated is defined through our configuration module. For example, if I wanted to charge this to a third party, you'll notice that I get a box that pops up and wants a level 5 security level in order for me to assign or in order to be able to charge this to a third party. Same would happen with a one-time charge. I'm going to hit cancel and then cancel one last time to allow me to open up my configuration module. So we'll spend our first couple of minutes here looking at on the configuration side what options are available that can control accounts receivable actually at the point of sale. We start out with underneath the configuration header down to repair order and over to the very first option in my submenu that says RO options. When I open up this window here, and again I'll be prompted for my password, and when we begin there's a couple of different options over here on the left hand side that are going to help to determine whether or not we can use those functions and or how we behave. Starting with, there's a box here that says display AR warning. As we start a new transaction for a customer that has an outstanding AR balance, this is asking whether or not we should display that balance on the screen. We can always see it through the link that will appear that says AR account. However, this asks whether or not we want to be able to see that or have it prompt for us as we come through. So we'll see that behavior here a little bit later on down the road as we finalize the transaction for Pat Clark, then go back and open another one. We'll see that prompt as we start a new transaction. Down towards the left where it says when closing RO, there's checkboxes here for allow a one-time charge and allow a third-party charge. If I have both of those boxes or one or the other not selected, then as we go to hit finalize, those buttons that say one-time charge and or third-party charge will not be available to us. So again, in RO options, three different pieces that help to define how AR behaves at the point of sale: the display AR warning, the one-time charge, and then also the third-party charge. I'm going to click on OK in the lower right-hand corner. Go ahead and close out of my RO options window. And then I'm going to go underneath the configuration header. This time, I'm going down to security, and in my security window, I'm going to open up my security levels. When I open up my security levels, again, it's going to ask me for a password. But as I'm going through this window here, first starting under repair orders / estimates. There's a couple of different things in here that we're going to look at, starting with, if I was to scroll down a little bit, as we get down to our one-time charge, our charge to AR count, and or our charge to third party. These will define, as we go to use those different options over on the payment window, whether we're prompted for a password or not. Again, in my case, as we attempted to do a third-party charge, it came up and said I needed a level 5 password. So without that security level, I wouldn't be able to charge to that third party and or to a one-time charge. So again, three different settings here in security that will also help define whether or not we have access to AR. And we're going to jump back and forth a little bit here as we go through and talk about AR at the point of sale. Going back over into my transaction for Pat Clark, I'm going to hit finalize again in the upper right-hand corner, click on OK to verify my mileage, and then finally get to my payment window, where we've got a balance of just over $1,000 outstanding. So again, as it relates to AR, our two options at this point are charge to a third party and or allow a one-time charge. So if Pat Clark also worked for a company that was owned by, let's say, Doug Clark, and he had an account with us, but Pat didn't. We could use the charge to third party. When I do that and put my password in, then what it wants me to do is to find that existing AR account. So in this case, if I again just typed in Clark, what you'll see is only one option comes up because it's only looking for customers that have an open account in the system. So the two asterisks preceding the name indicate to us that there is an open account for this customer. I could go ahead and assign this transaction to that and then define how frequently we're going to send a statement for this particular transaction. If monthly is the case, then I'll click on OK. And so now you'll notice my payment method flagged as charged to a third party, and here's my third party account that will be charged to. I'm going to hit cancel here to go ahead and close out of my payment window, because once I do, it'll clear it back out, allow me to come back in, because third party says we're going to charge this transaction to another open account that's already in existence in my RWriter system. One-time charge says we're going to charge this to accounts receivable, and we're not going to create an account for, in this case, Pat Clark, but we are going to allow her to have an outstanding AR balance. So again, in this case, we're paying it with a one-time charge, and we've told the system that we'll send statements on a monthly basis to Pat Clark. So again, we've got our monthly billing set there as a one-time charge. So again, I could go ahead and finalize this into AR and would create a balance, but not create an open account for Pat Clark to charge further transactions from that point. I'm going to hit cancel one more time because we're actually going to change what this button says, where it says one-time charge. I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to come back over here into the edit customer screen. So as I go into edit customer, down towards the bottom, 3 separate tabs, starting with the customer information, name, address, city, state, zip, and or when we get to the other info tab, the section in question is down here in the lower right-hand corner where it says charge account. I can define a credit limit for my charge account. I can tell the system that Pat Clark has an open account and whether or not we'll charge them finance charges, and by default, with what frequency will we send a statement, either monthly, weekly, and or semi-monthly. In this case, when we click on open account, you'll notice it says credit limit 0 equals unlimited. So if I didn't want to establish a credit limit, I would simply click on OK, and now I get a little button that shows up here in the edit customer window, which will tell me what it knows about the AR account that we've just created. In this case, no credit limit, no open balance, so my available credit is unlimited, and again, because no charge currently exists, our value there for oldest charge shows none. I'll click on OK, and the difference when I click on Finalize is when I get into my payment window, I can now see on the right-hand side where the button now says Charge to AR account as opposed to a one-time charge. It recognizes that they have an open account here towards the top. I can see that they do have an unlimited credit limit on this particular transaction. Cancel again, I'm going to go back into the customer window for Pat Clark and then down to my other information tab, where now I'm going to tell it that we're going to give her a credit limit of $1,000. Again, in this case, this transaction slightly north of that $1,000 credit limit. When I click on OK, hit finalize again, down there on the right-hand side will verify our mileage, and now you'll notice my available credit is just $1,000. If I was going to attempt to charge that to the AR account, it tells me there's not enough available credit to close this invoice. So it rigidly enforces that limit to say we're not going to allow you to charge beyond that whatever limit's been established. So again, in our case, we could take $1,000 and we could assign it to the AR account. We'd have to come up with the full payment. It says, would you like to apply the full amount due? In this case, it wouldn't allow me because I don't have enough available credit. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel to get back out of here. Back over into the edit customer window again, we'll go back down to other info, and I'll change that now to give her enough credit to where we can now finalize this transaction. One other piece as far as this window is concerned, again, I've come into the edit customer window. I've gone over to the other info tab. We can actually apply security settings to different values inside of this window here. If I went back into my configuration screen, notice charge to AR, charge to third party, and a one-time charge is what we were looking at. In this case, if we were to scroll back up a little bit in my configuration window, so in this section here where it says edit customer, If I assign a security level here, then being able to click on the Edit Customer button itself, so just clicking on this window here, will prompt me with a security password. If you look at the other configuration settings, Edit Customer Other Info, Tax Exempt, Open Account, and then last but not least, Fleet Information. If I was to go back into our writer, and if I was to come into the Edit Customer window, if I put a security level on the Other Info, then when I click on that tab there, it's going to ask me to put in a security level. If I was to assign one into the Edit Customer Info Open Account, then if I try to change this box, I'm going to have a security level associated. So if you don't want your front counter or your shop personnel to be able to create open accounts, then what we'll do is we'll come in here and we'll tell the system that we're not going to allow this to be changed. Again, we'll make my manager be the one that has to create that open account. Click on OK, and then OK to leave my security settings. Now, anytime we change the security setting, we always want to close our writer and reopen. But if I was to go ahead and leave the program just for a moment, give it just a second to close and then launch our writer again, as we bring up our main our writer window, what it will allow us to do is if we were to go back into a customer window, we can then go ahead and edit that customer, create that open account, and see where it's going to ask us for a password. So again, we'll stay away from Pat, who already has an account associated, but in Edit Customer, Other Info, Open Account, and then when I click on OK, that's where I see the passwords. It says you have changed the status of that particular box. In order to make that change stick, I've got to now put in my password to have it accept the fact that we now have an open account, in this case for John Smith. Back to Pat for just a moment, because I want to go back and I want to give her enough credit available to charge that transaction that we've got pending. I'll click on OK. Again, put in my password to verify the change. Now we're going to finalize her transaction. And this time we'll do it for good, where with her $2,000 credit limit, we can charge the entire amount to an AR account, hit Finalize in the lower right-hand corner, and we won't take the time to print a final repair order, at least not at this point. So if we come back into history to go and take a look at that transaction, again, the customer's last name was Clark, and there's Pat and Doug, both with open accounts, the asterisks preceding our visual cue. And if I was to go in and look at the history on our 2002 Ford Mustang, here's that transaction we've just closed. It was opened on 5/17, closed on 5/24. If I was to hit Display Repair Order, what we'll see when we look at the calculations is that there were no payments made against this. The amount due was $1055.50, and that's the current outstanding invoice balance. We'll come back in here before we're through and take a look at this AR payments for this invoice, which will give us the detail if we're making payments over the course of time of what payments have been applied to this individual transaction. But for the time being, we're going to leave Pat, leave the history, and then now we're actually going to jump over into the Accounts Receivable module. Over on the left-hand side, I'll launch my Accounts Receivable module, and when it comes up, we've got a handful of icons to the upper left-hand corner. We're going to skip the first one just momentarily and go over to where it says Post Payment. We're going to fast forward in time, and we're going to pull up Pat. She's back in today to make a payment against that outstanding balance. So I go ahead and search my customer list, and as I come up and find Pat Clark, it shows me just the single transaction that we've got outstanding for our friend Pat Clark. By default, it assumes we're applying the payment today. It just wants to know, well, how much money is she giving us towards this particular transaction? If she came in to pay $100 against her outstanding balance, I'll enter in that amount in the enter amount of payment, and it starts out by telling us that we have $0 in allocated payments, $100 in the balance. So it wants to know against which transaction are we paying that $100. Now there's two ways we could apply it. Easiest way is to come up here at the top and click on the button that says Auto Apply. When you have just a single transaction, then it just takes the entire amount that we're using as the payment and applies it to that single transaction. So when I do that, you'll notice my payment amount is now $100, and then the entire amount has been allocated, no balance still outstanding to be allocated for this particular transaction. I'll hit Clear Payments, and it takes it back out, just reverses what that Auto Apply had done, Because the other thing we could do is we can apply it to individual transactions. Now, not very applicable in this case because we just have the one transaction, but we'll come back and look at another example where I've got more than just a single AR transaction and we can apply the payments individually. If I double clicked on it, when I do it, it says I'm assuming that we're paying the entire amount, which is not the case. It's just the $100. When I click on OK, now very similar to what we did with auto apply, we have applied that $100 payment against that outstanding transaction for Pat Clark. So we come in and we make our payment. We make sure that the payment is entirely allocated. If I don't allocate the payment, what it will do is it will post it against this account. But what we'll see is we'll see the original transaction of $1,055, and then we'll see a payment overage of $100 because it was not applied to any individual transaction. So if we go back, I'm going to auto apply, and then now two buttons to the right-hand side, post payment or post and continue. The difference between the two is if we click post payment, it's going to take us to our payment screen where we can define the tender type. How did she give us the $100? If we hit post and continue, it'll do the same, but once we're done, it will not exit her transaction or her account. It'll leave us in her account and allow us to continue to post transactions or post payments against that individual transaction. So in our case, we're going to post payment. We're just taking one tender type from Pat, only a single payment made against her account today, and the amount is $100. Our only options are cash, check, and or credit card. In this case, we'll say that she came in and wrote us a check for that. If I'd like, I can capture my check number as well as an authorization and then hit OK in the lower right-hand corner. We'll save that payment, and she probably would like a receipt that shows we did take that payment from her. So I'll print that to the screen, and then what we get from that is our AR payment receipt, where I can now show against this invoice we took this amount, total payment of $100, an outstanding balance on our account of $955.50. Closing back out of here, we want to go back into post payment because, again, slightly differently, I'm going to go and I'm going to take a look at ARI. I've got a local fleet that is managed by ARI, and so they come in every so often. We do some work for them, and then in theory we submit the bills to ARI. When I look at my ARI account, I've actually got 4 different transactions that are outstanding. So we can do this one of 2 ways. If they said, well, your total balance was $719.94, they mailed us a check for $500. So that is not paying off the entirety of all of the existing charges. However, we're going to pay off some in full, and then we'll pay off one in partial. Because when I click on auto apply, what it will do is it will actually apply the amounts to the transactions based upon the reference number. It's not actually the date, it's the reference number that is assigned to these here that it uses to determine which one was really the oldest, really the lowest reference number. So when I click on auto apply, it says, well, if I have $500 to apply, I could pay off the first one, I could pay off the second, and then I'm short paying the third because I only had $23.34 left to pay against it. So when I hit post payment, it will take me out, allow me to define how that was paid. And again, what we would have at the back end is we'd have a $5 balance on this transaction and then the full amount of this one still pending based upon the fact that we only had so much to apply to this particular transaction. I'm going to hit clear payments here for just a second because I want to take a look at the difference between post payment and post and continue. When we did post payment, we took the $100 from Pat Clark, we printed a receipt for her, and then it took us just back to our AR window. If I hit post and continue, what it would then do is I would say, well, let's see, the first transaction was $133.76. And I can either use auto apply to apply it to this amount, and or if I double clicked and said OK, now I've allocated that entire amount to that transaction. If they mailed me 4 separate checks, in this case, I want to take each check individually because they'll get deposited individually. I want to record that there were 4 separate checks sent from ARI. I'll hit post and continue. We'll say that we took a check, and again, number and authorization if desired. We'll hit OK, and then when we save payment and say no, you'll notice we're still in our account for ARI, now only seeing the 3 transactions that are pending versus the 4 that we had just a moment ago. So that's the difference between your post payment and your post and continue. is, does it stay in the account for the particular customer, allowing us to post multiple payments in sequence, and or does it just take the payment and leave the window, going back just to our main AR screen? So we've taken payments against our transaction. If we went back and looked in history one more time, so the history was for our customer Pat Clark. When we find Pat enter 2002 Ford Mustang, not only does it show that there's an AR account here, but if I was to go and look at that transaction itself, on that calculations tab, when I look at the AR payments for this invoice, it shows there's been one payment made against it in the amount of $100. And if she came in time and again and we kept adding additional payments, they would just continue to show in this window here. So we could see what AR payments were made against an individual transaction over the course of time. So again, where we've got AR payments for this invoice, we'll now see that we've made those payments. Let's start a new estimate for Pat, just because there was that configuration setting that we looked at where it said display AR warning. And in this case, after we pick vehicle as well as customer and then enter a mileage, here's my AR warning. It says that she has a $2,000 credit limit. The balance, because we've taken the $100 payment, now $955.50, and so $1,000 and change the available credit based upon our $2,000 credit limit. Roll discharge, since it was just today, falls in that 0 to 30-day bucket. But again, here is our AR warning as we start. Whether we have it display the AR warning or not, we'll always get on the Parts and Labor tab this AR account button. And if I click there, the exact same window we just looked at. So we still can go back and reference that. It's a question of whether it prompts us as we begin the transaction with the AR information, or that we have to go look for it by clicking on that AR account button. Hit the X and we can leave Pat just as an estimate in progress. I think we're done with her at least for the time being. Back over into accounts receivable. We've used post payment, again, whether it was with Pat Clark and or ARI, to take one larger payment and or multiple payments through post or post and continue. If we needed to go back and change anything about what's been done previously, if we go into edit accounts, I'm going to come in here to my edit account, and again, it's going to want to know, well, exactly what was the customer we're looking for. In this case, we'll start with ARI, click on OK, and now here are my 3 different transactions. If I needed to change anything about any of these transactions, I'd simply double click on any one of the lines, and it now brings up into my edit AR entry window. Well, here's my reference number, there's my transaction date along with description. It was a finalized repair order. We first sent a statement and or it was done based upon the day that the transaction was started, and the last statement we sent was back on the 16th. So again, as we're talking about aging a little bit later on, and we can tell the system we've sent a statement and or based upon when we actually compile a statement, we'll start aging our AR transaction. Didn't have a PO number for them in this case, and then $342.90 was my total. Click on OK. So any changes we want to make to any of our existing AR records, we can go ahead and we can make that change. If this was not an accurate and or this was a transaction that we wanted to make go away, there is a way we can delete those. And again, in this case, now removed it from my AR account. Did that specifically because there is an audit trail of any AR records that have been removed. So when we get over to reports, we'll see what's called a deleted AR report, where I'll be able to see back into history what transactions have been deleted over the course of time. I'm going to leave my transaction window for ARI. I'm going to come back into my edit accounts screen, because as we do, I'm going to pull up Pat one more time, and as I do, you'll notice edit customer, which just takes us to our edit customer screen, where if I wanted to change that credit limit, I can do that right there. The add charge would say, well, there needs to be another line here that doesn't exist as it sits currently. We'll come back and do that here in just a moment, because the last icon says rollback payment. In our example, I said we took a $100 check from Pat Clark. If, unfortunately, that check came back, let's say NSF, so it bounced back to us, we want to make sure that we apply and or we put that $100 back on her account. We could either change the transaction itself, or if we hit rollback payment, it'll want to know, well, what day was the payment taken? Now, if we had happened to take 10 different payments on that day against Pat Clark's account and we hit rollback payment, all it's looking for is any AR transaction paid against that account on the day we've selected. When I click on OK, now rolls that payment back. And so now, in addition to the $9.55 outstanding balance on that transaction, we now have the $100 that was originally paid, but again, we had to reapply. So now we've got our repair order back on there, in this case, $100 as our amount that we've added back into her account, bringing her balance back up to the $10.55 number it started at a short time ago. I might want to add on a non-sufficient funds fee. If it came back to me, well, I've charged $25 for any returned check. In this case, it wants a reference number. As I mentioned before, if you do an auto apply, it's the reference number that's going to drive based upon how old and or the sequence in which it uses to auto apply. In this case, my reference number we're going to set back to the exact same transaction number that we were using for the original invoice. So in this case, 102,229. The transaction date will be today, and again, in this case, NSF fee will be my description, so when we send her a statement, print a report, we'll know why we bothered. We're adding that today, and so again, from an aging perspective and a finance charge perspective, we'll leave the day just as today's date. No purchase order number, however, the fee was $25 that we wanted to add. When I click on OK, now it brings up that NSF fee. Again, because that reference number is in sequence or in line, it puts it into the group along with the other transactions with that exact same reference number. So rollback payment says we're going to take that payment off of there, and now you'll notice my outstanding or open balance, $10.8050 for our AR for our customer, Pat Clark. The X in the upper right-hand corner, as we move beyond editing and or posting payments, the next thing we want to do is we want to let people know that there's some monies owed. When I click on statements, it's going to ask me, well, what type of statement do we want to run? And again, you can assign to an individual customer whether we're going to run their statements monthly, semi-monthly, and or weekly. And again, it just determines which customers we're going to run the AR statements for, or if I wanted to run it for one very specific customer, a statement for a single customer. In terms of the detail we're going to include, well, much like a credit card, we'll give people the last 30 days worth of transactions as we print our statement, and in our case, we're going to print them for the month. Hitting print doesn't actually send them off to the printer. What it does is it says, based upon your outstanding AR history, you've got 5 different statements to send. In this case, ARI, I don't actually send them a statement, I send them copies of each individual invoice, so we're probably not going to send them a statement, we'll leave it just the other 4. I'll click on print and print that to the screen. And again, as I print it to the screen, I'll get 4 different pieces of paper as I print that out, 1 for each of my individual customers. So here's our statement for Pat Clark. There were no payments made because we've rolled the one back. We didn't have any previous outstanding AR balance. However, we do have the 3 transactions that now exist currently, and again, $1,080.50, the total of open charges. As we look towards the bottom, it says, thanks for your business, because we appreciate her coming in and spending some money with us. All of her transactions fall in the current, as opposed to either a 30 to 60, 60 to 90, or over 90-day time frame. If you look up in the upper left-hand corner, this is page 1 of 4. If I was to skip to page 2, there's my statement for Dynalectric, who had no charges in the current month. However, their balance falls in the 30 to 60-day bucket. You'll notice there is a different message that shows up, whether it's 30 to 60, 60 to 90, and or over 90 days in terms of the date of the oldest transaction. 2 of 4 pages, if I wanted to print a statement for each individual customer, I would go ahead and just spool these off to the printer. If I want to be able to send a statement electronically, what I want to do is do the statement for each individual customer, create their own PDF, and then now I could attach it to an email and send them electronically as well. Were I to go down that road, I would actually leave my window here. I would say, well, let's send Pat Clark an electronic copy. And in this case, when I get to my statements window, not running it for monthly statements, but we'll just do statements for a single customer. Or if I wanted to do monthly, I could do it that way as well. And when I hit print, I'm going to select none. This time, just select Pat Clark. I'll hit print, and then if I want to create an electronic copy of it, I'll need to print it to the screen. In this case, once it prints it to the screen, to the upper left-hand corner, that little icon there that's got the arrow coming up and then out to the right is how we export any report in our writer to some other format. The most commonly used one would be a PDF, but we could also export it to Excel, a CSV, and or an XML file. So again, a number of different options for us to export as we go through. So whether we're sending the statements via snail mail or we're doing them electronically, again, we can do that through that statements window. Once we're done there, we could go and we could take a look at some of the different AR reports that are available. In this window here, again, if you'll notice, there's a couple of these reports that do not have an asterisk preceding them. The ones with the asterisk will pay attention to the date range. Something like an accounts aging report, that's just going to look at the totality of all of our different AR transactions. And it doesn't show us based on the date, but just by individual customer, their total and where it falls in the buckets 30, 60, 90, and or whether we've assessed any finance charges to that particular transaction. As I close back out of here, my accounts aging and or the open charges report, which will show us not just the customers and their total, but again, what transactions make up that individual total. If I wanted to just look at the transactions report for a particular time frame, I would just run that one. Or if I said, well, let me just see all of the AR transactions for an individual customer. I don't want to run a statement, but I'd like to see everything that Dynalectric has done with us over the past year. Again, define our date range, and then we'll see the individual statements based upon that particular time frame. If we've assessed any finance charges, this will tell us all the finance charges that are currently outstanding and what AR payments have been taken against any open transactions. If a customer wanted to know, well, what payments have I made against it, we can use this to see just the payments, not the outstanding transactions. But then also, if we had deleted a transaction, our deleted charge report gives us the opportunity to find a specific customer, and or in my case, we printed it just for the day. What we should see is we did delete that one charge for ARI. So again, shows us that that was the charge that had been removed. So again, we don't lose visibility into those charges that have been removed. They show up on our deleted charge report over in the AR reports module. One last piece as far as AR is concerned, and there is some setup over here in the very last icon. Not a bunch as far as AR is concerned. We're going to skip over the top for just a moment and get down to the bottom. So when we run statements, if the oldest charge is 0 to 30, then this is what we're going to print at the bottom of that statement. If they're 30 to 60, now we get this message, 60 to 90, this message, and then over 90 days. And again, it's strictly based upon the date of the oldest charge. If I have one charge that's over 90 days old, and then I've got 20 charges that are in the last 30 days, it's that 90-day message that's going to print. Again, the date of the oldest charge is what defines the message that prints. Up towards the top is where we'll define what happens with finance charges. Again, in my case, I'm relatively cheap, just a 1.5% finance charge for every 30 days that a charge is not paid. I guess not tremendously cheap. I'm at 18% over the course of the year. Begin the finance charges when the charge is greater than, in this case, I've got 45 days old, and I'm aging them based upon the date of the charge. The options are date of charge or date of first statement. So if I'm running statements once monthly, I could say, well, I'll give you 30 days from the day that I run, the day that that charge first appears on a statement before I will assess finance charges on that balance. So again, whether we're doing it based upon when we run the first statement or when we run the charge itself, again, we're telling it how many days before we would actually apply finance charges to that list. Close back out of here, and that brings me to the end of the accounts receivable module, as well as the topic and or the agenda of items that we were going to present today.